You eat before the king eats. Every meal, every dish, every day. Not because you are hungry, not because you are honored, because if someone put poison in that food, you die instead of him. This job existed for thousands of years. It exists right now, and nobody ever asked if you wanted it. You did not apply. Nobody applies to be a food taster. You were chosen. Maybe you were a slave in ancient Rome, and your master decided your life was worth less than his dinner. Maybe you were a servant in a medieval court who was simply standing in the wrong place when the position became available. Maybe your family owed a debt. Maybe someone decided you were loyal enough to die for a man you had never spoken to directly. In ancient Rome, they called you the pregustator. That was your official title. It sounded almost important. It was not important. You were a tool, a breathing instrument designed to absorb whatever danger was meant for someone else. In medieval Europe, you had no title at all. You were simply the one who ate first, the one who waited, the one whose face the king watched while pretending not to watch. If you showed no symptoms, the king ate. If you clutched your throat, fell to the floor, or simply stopped speaking, the king did not eat. That was your entire value. That was your entire life. Let us be honest about what this job required. Not courage, not skill, not intelligence. Availability. You had to be available every single time food was placed in front of the king. Breakfast, dinner, private meals, banquets with 500 guests, midnight snacks, every cup of wine, every bowl of broth, every piece of bread. You ate first, always. And here's the part that made it worse. You rarely knew what you were tasting for. Poison in the medieval world was not like poison in a story. It did not always work immediately. Some poisons took hours, some took days. Some accumulated in the body slowly, building toward a death that looked exactly like illness. This meant that if you ate poisoned food and felt nothing, you might still be dying. You just did not know it yet. The king ate. You stood nearby. You waited. Sometimes you waited for hours before understanding that tonight you were safe. Sometimes you never understood anything again. The court developed elaborate rituals around this uncertainty. In the court of Elizabeth I, food tasting was a ceremony involving 24 royal bodyguards, one for each course. Drums played, trumpets sounded. A noblewoman served each dish to a designated taster. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. All of this theater, all of this ceremony, and underneath it, just a person eating food they did not choose, hoping they would still be alive by morning. History does not remember most of you. That is part of the story. The kings have names. The queens have portraits. The poisoners, when they were caught, have trials and documents and dramatic endings. But the tasters, the people who stood between royalty and death every single day, almost nothing. We know a few names because something went wrong. Helotus, a eunuch in the court of the Roman Emperor Claudius. His name appears in the historical record because Claudius was poisoned anyway, allegedly through mushrooms that somehow bypassed the tasting process entirely. Some historians believe Helotus himself was involved in the plot. Others believe he was simply present when history decided to happen. Either way, the emperor died, and Helotus lived. That tells you something about how this world worked. There was a woman named Margot Wolk. She was not a medieval servant. She was a young German woman in the 1940s who was taken to a facility near Adolf Hitler's military headquarters and told to taste his food every morning at 8 o'clock. She did this for over 2 years. She survived. She never spoke about it publicly until she was 95 years old. She said the fear never left her. Not after the war ended, not after decades passed, not after the world changed completely. The fear of sitting down to a meal and not knowing if you would stand up again, that stayed with her until she had almost no time left. That is what this job did to people. Not just their bodies, their minds. Here is what nobody told you when you started. Some poisons have no taste. Medieval poisoners knew this. Renaissance poisoners were even better at it. The most sophisticated among them, and there were sophisticated ones, particularly in Italy, particularly in the courts where poison was practically a political tradition, had developed substances that were colorless, odorless, and completely undetectable to the human tongue. You could eat the entire dish, feel nothing, report that everything was safe, and still be delivering death to yourself and to the king. The most famous of these was called aqua tofana, a slow-acting poison developed in 17th century Italy. It could be administered in small doses over time. It caused symptoms that looked like natural illness. It was virtually impossible to detect. Hundreds of people were allegedly killed with it before anyone understood what was happening. Your tongue was useless against something like this. Your body was useless. Your loyalty, your attention, your years of careful service, useless. The poison that could actually kill a king was precisely the poison that a food taster could not find, which meant your job was not really protection, it was theater. Expensive, elaborate, human theater, designed to make the king feel safe, not to actually make him safe. The most important thing to understand about food tasters is this: they often did not work.
Claudius had Helotus. He died anyway. Alexander the Great had tasters. Most historians believe he was poisoned anyway, though the argument about what killed him has continued for 2,000 years. Various medieval kings had elaborate tasting protocols involving multiple servants, silver plates that were supposed to change color in the presence of certain substances, and entire departments dedicated to kitchen security. Some of them still died in ways that looked suspicious. Because determined poisoners did not put the poison in the food, they put it in the wine cup after the tasting, in the medicine administered by a trusted doctor, in the air of a sealed room, in a letter with a treated seal that the king touched with his fingers, in the fabric of his clothing. There were 1,000 ways to kill a king. The food taster protected against one of them, and everyone in the court knew this, including you. Which means you lived every day with a particular kind of knowledge that your death, if it came, would be largely meaningless. You would die. The king might die anyway, and history would record the king's death in detail while recording yours, if at all, as a footnote. You were the footnote. You always were. You might think this is ancient history. It is not. Vladimir Putin currently employs a food taster as part of his personal security detail. This has been reported by multiple sources. The most powerful man in one of the world's largest countries in the 21st century still sends someone else to eat his food first. Pope John Paul II had food tasters. Multiple heads of state across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East have maintained the practice into the modern era.
The specific fear that created this job, the fear that someone close to you wants you dead and knows how to make it look natural, that fear did not go away when we invented democracy or antibiotics or food safety regulations. It went underground. It put on a suit. It hired security consultants and called them by different names. But somewhere tonight, in a room most people will never see, someone is eating food they did not choose, waiting to see if they will be fine, so that someone more important can eat the same thing afterward. The job is still there. The person doing it still has no choice, and the person they protect still does not think about them very much. The real story of the food taster is not about poison. It is about expendability. Every society in every era has maintained a class of people whose lives are considered acceptable losses. People whose deaths are unfortunate but manageable.
People who can be placed between danger and power, because the calculation, when someone powerful makes it, is simple. Their life is worth less than mine. This calculation did not require cruelty. It did not require hatred. It did not even require conscious thought. It was simply built into the structure of how courts worked, how power arranged itself, how loyalty was purchased and spent. You were loyal. You were present. You were available. You were therefore useful. And useful people in these systems were used, not celebrated, not protected, not remembered, used. The food taster who died doing their job was mourned briefly, if at all, replaced quickly, and forgotten almost immediately. The food taster who survived doing their job for 20 years retired into an obscurity so complete that we cannot find their name today. Margot Wolk survived. She was 95 years old before anyone thought to ask her what it had been like.
Helotus, if he was innocent, stood next to power every day for years and has been remembered only because the man he failed to protect died. You were not the story. You were never the story. You were just the person who ate first. Nobody asked what it did to you inside. That was not a question courts thought to ask. Courts thought about logistics, about protocol, about the king's safety and the kitchen's procedures and the correct sequence of silver plates and tasting ceremonies. They did not think about what happened to a person who spent years eating food that might kill them. But something did happen. People who live under constant low-level threat develop a particular relationship with their own bodies. Every stomach cramp becomes a question. Every headache becomes an investigation.
Every moment of tiredness after a meal. Was that normal tiredness? Or is this how it begins? You stopped trusting your own sensations. Because your sensations were no longer just information about your body, they were information about whether you were dying. Margot Wolk described this. She said that for years after the war, she could not eat a meal without fear. Not because anyone was trying to poison her, because her body had learned that eating was dangerous, that the table was a place where something terrible might happen, that food, the most basic human comfort, was a source of dread. She unlearned it eventually, or she learned to live with it, but it took decades. And she was one person for 2 years. Imagine doing this for 20 years, for 30, for an entire career in a royal court where the threat never disappeared because the politics never simplified and the enemies never ran out and the king never stopped needing someone to eat first. What did that do to a person? We do not know, because nobody asked, and the people who could have answered are gone, their inner lives as thoroughly erased as their names. There was something everyone in the court understood, but nobody stated directly. Your death, if it came, would be useful, not just as a warning, as information. If you ate the food and died, the king knew not to eat. He also knew that someone in his court, his kitchen, his inner circle, had tried to kill him. Your death would trigger an investigation. People would be questioned. Arrests would be made. The poisoner, if caught, would face consequences so severe they were designed to discourage anyone from trying again. Your death was not meaningless to the system. It was data.
The system would process your death efficiently and move on. A new taster would be found. The protocols would be reviewed. The kitchen staff would be questioned more carefully. And within days or weeks, the seat you occupied at the edge of the king's table would be filled by someone else. Someone who had also not applied, who had also not been asked, who would also eat first at every meal and wait and watch their own hands for trembling. You were replaceable. That was perhaps the most important thing about you from the court's perspective. Not your loyalty, not your years of service, not your family or your fears or the specific texture of your courage. Your replaceability. Because a system built on human expendability only works if the humans can be expended and replaced without interrupting the larger machinery. You understood this. You understood it the way people understand things they cannot say out loud in the rooms where they spend their lives. You ate. You waited. You were replaced eventually, by retirement, by death, by someone younger who cost less and asked fewer questions. And the king kept eating.